Welcome to the podcast, Greer. This podcast is called Brain in You.
Thank you.
And very excited to have you here today because you belong to an area which is of interest to me, which is biomedical. And through you, I want the parents who will listen to this to understand how natural other interventions can work and what power do they have. Just to give you a background, that my company Iyurved works very closely with neurodiverse families, most likely children, teenagers, young adults who are neurodiverse. And we work with them through nutrition, a lot of gut nutrition, brain nutrition, nutrition for sleep, immunity. And mostly those people, all of them, what I've heard based on the conversations that we have, that they do take therapy, but when it comes to alternative healing methods, I think this will be a great platform and they get to hear you and they get to understand. So just be very, very simple. If there are more technical terms, just break them down so that we can just understand them better. And why don't we start by you introducing yourself first?
Sure. So my name is Greer McGuinness. I'm a registered dietitian by trade. I have a master's in health science. I've published two research papers on my work with sulforaphane treatment for autism spectrum disorder, as well as metabolic interventions with a Springer book. I have a private practice called Biomedical Healing for Kids. I'm an autism mom myself, and I love this new area of biomedical approaches because it is one of the first things that I started doing for my own son when I wasn't seeing progress and I wasn't seeing, any support or any help when we were doing just normal therapies. And
Mm,
once
mm.
I was able to dive deeper and look at more root cause or things that were going on, I was able to transform him into this amazing little boy who is just exceptional today. So I am
Okay,
forever grateful and indebted to this area of biomedical healing for working with these special kids with autism and ADHD.
that's fantastic. How old is your son now?
He's 11 now.
Okay, okay. So, can we start by maybe breaking this down, Bree? Can you just tell us what is biomedical healing?
Yeah. So biomedical, so we know kids with autism and ADHD have something called a different biochemistry. So internally, their human body is very different than a neurotypical child. We know from research that they tend to have higher levels of inflammation, things like mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain, oxidative stress. They have higher levels of heavy metals and toxins in their system. So we know biochemically, their systems are very different than a neurotypical person. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know the reasons why this is happening. It could be genetic, it could be just, things that were going on, early interventions or early environmental load, things like that. So what we do at the biomedical approach is we're using alternative testing and different approaches to understanding the human body. So
Mm-hmm.
when you go to your doctor's office, once a year and you do blood work, we kind of call that cookie cutter blood work. It's just the same routine over and
Yeah,
over again. It's the
yeah.
same labs. And with functional medicine and the biomedical approach, we're using different types of testing
Okay.
that, looking at the microbiome and stool testing, we're looking at toxins in urine or viral infections through blood. So we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at the person as an individual and putting a plan in place to identify what could be the better approach for this person rather than
Got it.
just do cookie cutter testing.
Got it. So biomedical would also include nutrition.
Correct. Yeah, we that's why we look at the microbiome in the gut
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes we do food sensitivity testing and
Yeah, yeah.
we approach everything as an individualized approach. Everything, no two humans are alike unless they're identical twins.
Hmm.
So, we need to make sure that the person that we're working with has a individualized plan based on what their body needs, which
Mm-hmm.
is why there are 40 different types of diets out there, and
Yeah,
one works for one child and one might not work for another child, and that's just because of their biochemical makeup.
yeah, yeah. So, what are some common nutritional deficiencies in neurodiverse children?
There's actually a lot. So research has actually shown that kids with autism have at least one nutritional deficiency, where in my case, I think it's way more than just one. Most of my kids have five or more.
Yeah.
Typically, we'll see a lot of low vitamin D, we'll see a lot of low iron, even,
Yeah.
B vitamins, minerals. I mean, it really does depend on the child and their nutrition status and what they eat, since every child
Mm,
eats differently.
mm,
That can vary from kid to kid, but typically a lot of the nutrient deficiencies are all important nutrients that are impacted for the brain function.
yeah. I do go through some of the videos that experts put out, and some of them do claim that diet has no major impact on autism. So, according to you, how much of an impact does diet have on autism?
Diet has a huge impact on autism for multiple different reasons. So
Hmm.
the microbiome to me is the engine to the car. So, and this is usually how I explain this to my patients, because if the engine to the car isn't working, the rest of the car doesn't work. The windows don't roll up or down, the radio doesn't turn
Mm,
on, the windshield wipers don't work. So I understand that diet isn't going to be this miraculous change for everybody, and I totally understand and respect that. But it doesn't mean that internally, when you change the diet, that good things aren't happening for just the overall body's health standpoint.
mm, mm,
So, that's why I think research has a hard time in this area, because what works for one kid might not work for
yeah.
another.
Mm,
But we do know that majority of kids who do change their diet, who start focusing more on whole foods, even just from what I've seen in my own practice, it has done amazing things for
yeah.
kids, even,
No.
and we're not saying that it's going to miraculously make them speak or, change their behaviors, but just their overall affect of just feeling better and feeling good so that they can do their best
Yeah. Yeah.
has been shown to happen with a better diet.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think just by them feeling better in their gut just brings down the hyperactivity, their meltdowns. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. So, do you think pharmaceutical interventions are being overused for neurodiverse children?
With more of ADHD than anything, I've had more kids be diagnosed with ADHD at 3 and 4 years old, being put on pharmaceutical medications, and I do not agree with that. I mean, that's a
Mm,
personal, especially
choice.
when nothing else has been looked into, especially diet
Yeah.
change or moving of food dyes, or, making sure that their gut is rebalanced and their
Yeah.
nutrients are and up, so I think, there are things that have been overstepped here, where
Mm,
we definitely do know that there's a lot of medication errors, there's a lot of overuse of medication in the ADHD world, and that I don't agree with. um I would never tell a parent not to put their kid on a medication if they feel that it's going to help, but a lot of the times those medications also do have a lot of side effects, and a lot
yeah.
of those
Yeah.
families do start them and then stop them.
Yeah. 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 And many parents, feel very overwhelmed by conflicting advice on autism treatments. So how do
Mhm.
you navigate this noise? What do you tell parents about those different advices that they get on autism?
And I was that parent too. I mean, I have to admit, when I first started, I'm Western medicine trained. I went through schooling with all the doctors and nurses. We all were in the same classes together in undergrad, believe it or not. So I learned and trained with all of them as well, even through
Mm,
clinicals. So, we were taught that autism was genetic. It was a developmental delay since birth. And other than therapies, that was really the biggest interventions that you could do for a child. And when I was going through this myself, I was actually quite upset with the lack of resources and education that was out there to for us parents to try to navigate this very ginormous world.
Yeah.
And so now looking back, I'm like, that's why I try to make a lot of resources for my family is so that they can understand that there is so much more out there, that there is a lot more to do. And it's
Mm.
unfortunate that the have to dig for this information. They have to go searching and spend the time and the energy. So I've tried to make it easier with a lot of my free resources for parents to get better education, the correct information, so that they can better, figure out a plan for their particular child.
Yeah. So is biomedical healing actually science backed?
Yes. So there is some research in certain areas. It depends. But this is why we also call it practicing medicine, to be completely honest and fair. Not everything is going to have a research
Yeah.
study. Not everything is going to be backed up. Even for me, I'm working on my third publication on the pediatric microbiome for autism, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's not easy. I don't have any funding. I have to do this in my spare time. So it is difficult to continuously publish research. It's not
Yeah.
easy. It can take
Um,
months to a year or longer.
mm,
I love research. I love publishing because I think it's important. I think that research is extremely important for the community too, to advance our science.
mm,
But
mm.
since it's such an individual case by case, it's not just like saying, all these people have a specific, it's not like irritable bowel syndrome or, chronic, IBS.
Yeah.
All these kids with autism have so many different
Yeah.
comorbidities and biochemistry. So that's why a lot of the research, when we're looking at grouping kids together, there will be some kids that do really well and some kids that see no improvement because autism is a huge spectrum. So it's
Yeah.
really hard to identify what's going to work and what doesn't. But there is research on many different areas, on many different aspects of this. And,
Yeah.
hopefully more research will come out.
Yeah, I agree with this. So we work in the space of nutrition. So we have nutraceutical products, which are like food products. And now we have catered to almost 500,000 children, over 500,000 children, or teenagers or young adults. However, when I had to do a scientific paper, my first choice was empirical scientific paper because I had these families who believed in us, who saw changes. So we got in touch with a clinical person and he did the study, which is now published in a medical journal. But when we are asked this question that have you done a clinical study, it's very tough for and I'm told this, it's very tough to do a clinical study on a food product because you can't keep those children inside a compound and limit their intake. This is just food, and they're doing so many more other things. So I know it's actually very, very tough to navigate through this and which is
Yeah.
why I'm sure you would have faced this too, um, I don't know what your thoughts are, but do you think that some doctors and organizations discourage parents from exploring biomedical interventions?
Yeah, we I was one of them too. I had a developmental pediatrician that told, and I mean, I had started working with Keegan when he was about 4.5, and within 6, 7 weeks, I mean, he was like his language started exploding,
Mm.
he started writing his ABCs, and I had taken him back to his developmental pediatrician, I think probably a little after he was 5.
Hmm.
And I said, "Oh my gosh, look at what I did. Look at all, like I did gut work, I did this, I did that, I did detox." And she just looked at me. She's like, "Well, none of that is backed by science." And I said, "But proof is in the pudding." Like not trying to be mean, but like proof pudding. Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
in
You
six
can see it.
months, 7
Yeah,
like look at how
yeah,
like I mean we went from not being nonverbal with a really high VB map score of a 56 where he was 4.5. If you brought him into a kitchen, he could not label anything. He didn't know what a fork was, a spoon was. He'd look at you like you had six heads if you were asking him. And now you could bring him in at 5.5, and he was like, oh, fork, spoon, refrigerator, stove, So I I understand again that this isn't, anything that's backed by a global government agency saying that this is going to be helpful. But why would this be why would
Yeah,
this be
yeah,
harmful
yeah,
when
yeah,
you're
yeah,
going to put him
yeah,
on medication because he can't sit still? And that's
yeah,
okay. I have a really hard time understanding
yeah,
logic.
yeah, yeah,
Nowadays, I feel like we don't have very good logic with practitioners anymore.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with it. I mean, there are two ways to look at it. Even if it is not benefiting as per you, but it's also
Mhm.
not giving any harm. So maybe you wait a little bit longer. I mean, that was also one of the takeaways from the study that we did, that it helped some number of parents, but all the parents said that it never harmed us at all. So
No.
if you're consuming a food product which is full of all the right nutrition for the brain, then you might as well just consume it if it's not even harming you. So I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept that we in society today, where we look at eating a whole food diet or taking supplements is pseudoscience and bogus, but taking medication and,
Yeah.
is the norm. I find that very interesting that that is the way that people perceive health nowadays.
True.
And it's a very interesting concept.
True. Yeah. 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 This is like an elephant in the room. I'll ask you this question. You may have heard it many times in the past. Is there a cure for autism?
So I don't like to use the words cure. I don't use the words cure in my practice. I don't use the words recover or remission or anything like that. So true autism cannot be cured. True autism is a genetic abnormality that happened in utero, and it doesn't mean you still can't support the body, but it's not anything that's going to be cured or fixed. Now, what we have today in our society are kids who are getting environmentally damaged by things and regressing from that environmental damage. And that's where we have, people who come out and say, I've cured my son's autism or I've reversed my son's autism. They don't fit the criteria anymore. And that's a great thing, if that is what they're trying to accomplish. But I don't agree with the words and the verbiage is used because it also hurts
Mm.
a subgroup of people who have a diagnosis. Now, again, not everyone has true autism. So if those are the people who are gaining and recovering, so per se, then it wasn't technically true autism, it was something else. So I think it's a fine line to use those types of words and verbiages. And, when
Mm,
you're dealing with parents who are struggling,
mm,
they're
mm,
in
mm.
the trenches, they're in the thick of it going through it, and they want their kids to talk and they want
Yeah,
their kids to have a normal life. They're going to search for anybody and anything
yeah,
that has the word cure,
yeah,
recover. And
yeah,
that could be a very dangerous thing for parents to be suckered into things that could be harmful, could be dangerous for their children when they're not working with the right, proper
yeah,
people who do know what they're doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think so. What you're saying is that the focus should be on symptom management and quality of life.
Yeah, I've had kids lose their diagnosis before. Okay, I've worked with people. My son still technically is on the spectrum. He went from level 2 and now he's borderline, level 1. Probably would have a diagnosis of Asperger's. That would be technically his diagnosis. I would never want him to feel like I was trying to cure him. Okay. I think that's a very, from a mom parent standpoint, I would not want to say to him one day, well, I tried to cure you and it didn't work and you're still autistic. And that's not, that wasn't my goal. My goal was to make my son as happy and as healthy as I could possibly make him, because at the time when we were in the thick of it, he was miserable. He wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating, he wasn't growing, he was in pain, his gut was a mess, he was constipated. I mean, it was just a horrible time for us as a family and for him. I wasn't trying to fix him. I wasn't trying to cure him. I was just trying to make him feel his best.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is what I ideally try to tell my families, is that's what our goal is. So I'm going to try to make your child and rebalance your child to make them as happy and as healthy as I can possibly make them. And anything that we gain out of that is icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
start speaking. I've had kids start communicating, start playing with their siblings, lose their diagnosis. I mean, and I've had kids that are still nonverbal and they're older but they can follow directions. They are happy, they're sleeping, they're enjoying life with their families. And, so everyone has a different walk of life, everyone has a different child. So that is our ultimate goal, because, if you go in with the expectations that you're going to cure, recover, reverse, and it doesn't happen, you're disappointed as a parent. And then,
Yeah.
if your child start, progressing over time, are they going to be upset that that's what
Yeah.
you were looking for too? Again, it's a fine line, and I'm not discrediting any parent from trying to do what they feel is best. I just choose not to use those words for my
I
own
agree.
personal
I agree.
feelings, my
Yeah.
child.
And I think, especially when we especially encounter parents who have just been diagnosed, their child has just been diagnosed. So imagine that stage wherein you don't want to hear this word at all, but the doctor tells you that your child might be autistic, might be on the spectrum. So what you're looking for is nothing less than a cure or a miracle. And you give yourself very hard timelines that, I have 2 months, 3 months before my child goes to mainstream school. So I know, I think, yeah, I appreciate that. So before we end, Greer, tell me one absolute favorite success story, but not of your son. I've heard that.
Success story. So I had a family. Oh gosh. Okay, one success story. So most recently I had a family that I was working with. They had been working with another practitioner. And following different protocols and things like that. And they really weren't seeing progress. If anything, the child was kind of sliding backwards. So we kind of regrouped and redid some testing, and started working with the child with rebalancing their gut, working on detox. And my families know that I'm always there for them. And then I'm always there when they need me. So I hadn't talked to the family in a few months as they were doing all the protocols and switching some things around. And then the mom messaged me with an update that she brought her son in and he completely lost his diagnosis. He does not qualify for autism in any shape or form. They're still working through some ADHD like symptoms, but the kid is also a very young boy. So again,
I'm sure, yeah,
boys are very
perfect.
hyperactive. So I don't always agree with the diagnosis of ADHD. But that was just, the family was just, they found balance again in their
Yeah,
life. And when
yeah, yeah,
when you have a kid that's just so imbalanced, and it's just life is just so incredibly hard, and I completely understand where
yeah,
they're coming from on that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Excellent, beautiful. I think ending this podcast at that high note can be
Yeah.
extremely encouraging for whoever watches it. And we've seen such stories, so I know it's believable. It's amazing. Thank you for
Mhm.
joining us, Bree, in this podcast today.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. I'm happy that I was able to come on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.